Hello everyone and welcome to our Valentine's watercolor and resin tutorial. And so for this particular tutorial, I know I said Valentine's, but I'm going to say this isn't really a typical Valentine's painting that we're going to be doing. I thought we could do, I know it's probably hard to see a little bit. I thought we could really do like a little bit of stems of flowers for our painting and a little bee. So I have just sketched out real lightly my bee and my few little stems of flowers. They're kind of like long with little buds on them and stuff. So I'm going to keep this very, very loose and, just expressive and I'm not worried about detail right away. One thing you want to learn with watercolors or know is that you always want to start light to dark, number one, light colors to your darker colors, and then you don't want to worry about details right away. You want to just get in your initial colors and washes and backgrounds and whatever you're doing, and then you can go back and layer and add more details. So that's the number one thing I strive to tell my students, or to do not go for details right away. Do not. It's not that important. We're not going to, we're not, you want to focus on just getting some color down first. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm taping my paper down to my gator board. It's called a gator board. Just a hard surface that you can attach your paper to without, so if you need to move your painting, you don't have to disturb your paper. And I'm just using some artist tape. You can use painter's tape or anything, any kind of hard surface will do. Something. Anyway, I'm doing a 5x7. So when I'm finished this painting, I will be able to attach it to a 5x7 canvas panel. And I'm keeping my palette limited. I'm just using basically your basic colors here. I'm just using I'm using a couple blues. I have ultramarine blue. I have a little cobalt blue. I have some alizarin crimson. I have some opera pink. I have some new gamboge yellow, and I have some lemon yellow, and a little bit of Payne's gray. So I'm just keeping it really, really simple with my colors. If you don't have these exact colors, don't you worry about it. You use whatever colors makes you happy. If you want to use purples in your flowers, you can use purple. If you want to use, I'm going to make some greens, but if you want to just use a certain green paint, you do that. So, you do not have to use these exact colors. I'm just keeping it, I don't want to have 30 colors here on my palette, because then I think I would overwhelm you guys. So I'm going to start off with my, I think the number 6 round brush. Just use nice point on it. And I always wet my brush first. Now, my paints are freshly squeezed out, so I don't have to spray them with water to get them going. Normally, if you have your watercolor paints that have been sitting, you want to give them a little spritz with water before you get started. So I have no reference photo for this. And I will, though, have a little bit of a sketch for you that I will upload to the group with a bee. So in case you're not, you want to have a little bit of a traceable or little sketch that you can copy from, I will have that in the group in the guides tab. I will add a new guide, and I'll call it, traceables or sketches or something like that. So anyway, I'm just going to get started with my flower first, and I'm going to make a little bit of a green. So I'm going to take a little of my lemon yellow. I like to get it, kind of going on my palette, and a little water to it. And I think I'm going to take a little bit of my cobalt blue. little bit more yellow, and just make my own green for this tutorial. So it's a pretty spring colored green. Something dark on my tape here. That's okay. All right, so I'm just going to be very, very wispy, light-handed. I'm not going to be very dark and heavy-handed with my painting. I just want to, you know, be very, very light with this. And don't worry if your lines don't connect. Not a big deal. I'm just being very sketchy with my stems here. And I normally always work away, you know, like I don't want to start at the end of my stem and bring it down towards the base of the stem. You always kind of want to work out. So I'm just getting in a little bit of a stem first, and then I'll go back and add some little flowers and buds. Now my flowers are going to be just marks on my paper. They're not going to be any specific kind of flower. They're just going to be little marks I make with my paint. So I'm just adding a little bit more stem action here, and just keep it very loose and very expressive. See if I can fix this focus stuff because it just keeps bouncing. Okay, I'm going to start with my Opera Pink first, which is a very, very vibrant, bright pink. And I think a lot of brands, different watercolor brands, makes an Opera Pink. So I just want to keep it really pretty and fresh. So I'm just making little marks. That's all I'm doing. Little marks here and there. Some a little bigger. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is rinse my brush, blot the excess water off, and then I'll kind of go in and just kind of soften some of these buds. A little bit of a damp brush. Kind of feather them out a bit. Not every one, but just a few of them. Maybe take a little more pink, drop it in there. So then when we do resin, this is going to be really a pretty color to have the resin go over. All right. So now I think I'm going to pick up a little alizarin crimson. Do a few little red flowers here and there. I'm just kind of adding wherever. Being very random here. A little bit more. My red. You can add a little red to your pink if you want. So basically, I really am just making marks on my paper. And then I'll just hit it with a damp brush. I kind of kiss the edges of some of that red to keep them loose. Got a little more pink here. I'm going to put some pink on that red. I don't know why that keeps doing the focus. Okay. I'm going to darken up my green a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit of ultramarine blue to my green mixture here. And I'm going to add a little more lemon yellow. A little bit thicker consistency, not quite as watery. And make it just a little bit darker, and then kind of darken up, add a few little darker stems This is where you get to use your artistic license. Maybe add some leaves here and there. And you just make this as free and as simple as you want. I'm going to keep mostly, our painting tutorials fairly easy. I don't want this to really be about a perfect painting all the time. Just want to get some really pretty things down, and it's not so much, watercolor realism type of painting tutorials. I don't want to do that. I want these to be really pretty and loose and just fun, and not be so serious about them. So I'm adding a little yellow, a little bit of my new gamboge to make some pretty flower buds. All right, I'm going to leave my flowers alone for a little bit, and I'm going to work on my bee. So I have sketched him out, and I sketched out his eye area, and I'm going to there's a little bit of a white. I'm going to leave a little bit of a white area inside of his eye because you don't want to make it totally black. And if you do by mistake, then you can always take a little bit of white gouache or white acrylic paint just to dab in a little bit of a highlight of an eye. You can always use P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. It comes in a little jar, or a white gel pen, anything like that. If you need that little bit of a white in his eye, you can always use that. That's not a big deal. All right, so for my bee, here is his head. I'm going to wet his head, and I'm going to go around his eye a little bit, because now I'm going to be painting wet on wet, which means my paper is wet and then my paint will be wet. So I'm just wetting. I don't want puddles. I'm just kind of wetting where my dark colors are going to go for this bee. And actually, I should start with my yellow part of the bee. So I'm going to start with my yellow because, yeah, lighter first. So let me wet where I'm going to be putting my yellows. That was my rookie mistake. Always start with your lighter colors. Where you're going to be putting those. So I wet just a few little segments of him, and I'm going to use my new gamboge because it's more of a golden kind of a yellow, and I'm going to just drop in a little bit of that yellow paint. Now I'm not filling the whole thing in with that color, because now I'm going to rinse my brush, get all the excess water off, and I'm going to use what's here and just kind of push that paint around. You don't want it to be thick and solid. You want to see that beautiful transparency that only watercolors can give you. So I'm just kind of pulling it around with my damp brush of that yellow. Okay, and now I'm going to actually make a little tiny bit of an orange. So I'm going to take a little bit of that new gamboge yellow. You use whatever yellows you have. I'm going to take a little bit of just a tiny bit of my alizarin crimson, mix it in with my yellow, a little bit more maybe, to make more of a, burnt orange kind of color. And because this part of my bee is still a little bit wet, you'll notice that the colors will kind of bleed and feather out on that wet paper. So I'm just placing a little bit darker on the bottom edge of that yellow. And then again, rinse. And just kind of push that paint around. I always tell my students, you tell that paint who's boss. Push it around. Okay. I'm going to do his wings. Now his wings are really fairly light and transparent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a little bit of my lemon yellow here. I have a little bit down here. And I'm just going to make a very pale wash of my lemon yellow. And you just lighten up your colors by adding water. You don't need to add white. You don't ever add white to your paint to lighten it up. That's acrylics. Watercolors, you just add water. And I'm going to make my wings just this pale wash of lemon yellow. And don't worry, see how my yellow is kind of bled down a little bit into the bee where the darks go? That's okay, because you always can go over with dark, but you can't paint over dark with light. So you can always go darker. It's harder to go lighter. So I'm just going to use that pale wash of lemon yellow on my dry wings here. And just give it a real little loose color. Let me turn on my light here and see if it helps. It looks a little dark to me. Oh, no, that's too glary. Sorry about that. Okay, just leave it like that. So just a real light transparent wing of lemon yellow. All right, so now for the body of my bee, I'm going to use a little Payne's Gray. But I want to make sure this is dry first. So let me dry these. You want to make sure this part's dry before you start adding in your dark color, or it could bleed together. Hang on one sec. Okay, nice and dry. And now again, same thing. I'm going to wet little head area here, wet down around his body. A little bit of water, nothing too puddly or anything like that. Just going to wet where I'm going to be putting that Payne's Gray color. And Payne's Gray is basically just a really dark bluish gray, really dark. So I'm going to take a little bit on my palette. If you want to make your own dark, you can mix all three of your primary colors together, red, yellow, and blue, and you'll get a dark. I'm just going to use a little bit of Payne's Gray here, a little bit thicker consistency, not pasty dry, and not watery, but just enough to give it a nice color here. My paper is kind of dried quickly here. So I'm just going to go around, kind of putting in some color where my bee is going to be, where he's dark. And I'm going to stop here, rinse, blot, and just take my damp brush and start moving some color around. I don't want to totally paint him solid, so he's like flat in color. I like to use a damp brush to, help push my paint around, because it just gives us different values in there. It lifts some color out, it adds a little color in, and so I like to just, use that damp brush to help create a value change in my painting. So I think this is kind of dried a bit. I'm going to wet this again. And then drop in the coloring. You can kind of see, wet on wet, it just kind of explodes out, feathers out, which really creates some nice soft edges. So I'm just using a little bit of my tip of my brush here, give them a little fuzziness. Drop in that color. And remember, watercolors is all about layering your colors. It's not one and done. You have to have a lot of patience with watercolors. You really do. So don't get, take your time. Don't get frustrated. And don't think it has to be perfect. Yeah, I noticed that a lot. Like a lot of people want their paintings to look exactly perfect, exactly like the reference photo, or, things like that. And if it's not, they get frustrated. Well, that's not, you want, it's not how that goes. You want to just keep practicing, because that's the only way you're going to improve with your paintings. Keep practicing. Just dropping a little bit darker here. I'm just being very, very loose. I'm not trying to be extra detailed with this. Very more impressionistic. And expressive, and just take your time. And give a little fuzzy up here. And don't expect yours to look exactly like mine, or, don't compare, because really that's not good. Don't compare yourself ever, your paintings ever, to someone else's, because it's just not, it just is not good to do that. Everyone can do it. You can do it. He's a chunky bee. I'm gonna just take a clean, damp brush, take that water off. I'm gonna just take a little bit of that dark that's in there, and kind of use the tip of my brush just to kind of push some of that paint up into that wing a little bit, and then up into that yellow a little bit, just to kind of soften some of those edges. Get a little fuzzy down into that little hind end area, which I'm going to use a little bit of a lighter color. And around his eye. Grab a little bit of color on the tip of my brush here, and just kind of create a little bit of a dark ring. I'm leaving a little white ring on the outer edge, and a little bit of a dark ring on the inside. For his eye. A little bit more. So here's where you kind of can tweak. I'm going to grab a little bit more of my new gamboge, a little bit thicker consistency, and just go in and darken up some of this yellow here. Rinse, blot, just kind of pull some of that paint out. And a little lemon yellow, water drop. And I'm going to take a little bit of that lemon yellow, just put it down here, this little tail. A little bit of that new gamboge. Now, if you find you've gone too dark, you can always use a clean, damp brush and press down and lift out some of your color. There's always ways to fix things with watercolors. I'm going to just take a damp brush and use my tip of my brush just to kind of feather out some of these areas here on my little bee. Pulling out some of that dark. Okay. I need to make this eye a little darker inside. You notice like when I'm getting really a tiny detail, I hold my brush right down by right on the ferrule basically. And but when I want to like do my looser flowers, I tend to hold it back further because I'm not as controlled. Very controlled like this. Don't pitch your flowers like this. This is like too controlled. You want to hold your hand back further on your brush. You have less control that way. But then for tiny little details, I tend to be, hold it like a pen. And this is, like the icing on the cake when you finally get to put in your little details. Remember, you can always go back and darken, but it's harder. It's harder to go lighter. I know it's hard to see the wings so much in the video, but that's because they're so transparent. Maybe I'll just put a tiny, tiny bit of my little alizarin and new gamboge mixture, just a tiny bit, right along the edge a little, just to separate them. And then blend that out, soften that a little bit. So there's my silly little bee. I make some more green here, a little bit more. So here's where you can really kind of go in and tweak it and make it as loose as you want. I'll add some more of that pretty pink. Add some yellows. And I always have to remind myself, less is more. And let's see. Add some more cobalt blue here. And yellow. It's a little dry. Press down, make some leaves. Take the tip of your brush, press, lift. Get some little leaf shapes. Tip of your brush, press the belly, lift. And get some little leaf shapes. A little of that new gamboge right to the belly. Now you really can't see it much. It just breaks that darkness up a little bit. A little bit more of my Payne's Gray. Just darken out little areas here and there. Tweaking them. Just tweaking them a bit. Just keeping them loose. Okay. I think I'm going to call him done. I don't want to go in and I could go crazy and blues and violets and make him, you know, violet colors, but I want to keep them simple. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to let him dry. You have to let him dry completely, and then we will mount him to our 5x7 canvas panel. Let that dry for about an hour, and then I will come back and seal the top of the painting, but this painting has to be completely dry. So I'm going to let him go now, and then I will be back to show you how to mount this and seal it to your canvas panel. All right, see you in a little bit. Okay, I am here now with my totally dry painting. I have my 5x7 canvas panel, and I have an applicator, just a sponge applicator. I have a straight edge here, and I have my Mod Podge matte sealer. And I also have a piece of wax paper, which I'll explain what I'm going to do with that. So basically now you can see that my paper is a little bit bigger than my canvas panel, and I did that on purpose because what I like to do is then mount my paper. You know, I like to have a little bit of an overhang. That way I'm to be sure that I didn't totally cut it, my piece too small, and then it exposes some of the canvas panel. I always tend to do a little bit bigger with my cutting of my paper. But what I'll do is I'll make it even with this side, and then I'll just have some overhang here at the bottom and a little bit on the side. But I'm going to glue it this way. I'm going to glue it down, and then once it's totally dry, I'll flip it over and trim up the excess paper before I pour my resin, or before I seal the front and pour my resin. So, all right, so here's what I'm going to do. I take my little sponge applicator and just get some on the sponge, Mod Podge on my sponge, good amount, and I just go over my canvas panel. I don't do my paper, I do my canvas panel. And you can use a flat brush, a little chunky there. You can use a little flat brush if you wanted, anything that you're going to be able to get this on your canvas. I don't do the sides. I just do the top. If some gets down on the sides, that's fine. But just really make sure you get these edges really, really well in the corners. Because sometimes if I haven't gotten my corner really well, and everything else is adhered really, really well when I go to resin, I'll notice that one of the corners is lifting. I'll have to then stick some resin underneath there and while I'm doing that part and glue it down. So try to get your, be generous with your Mod Podge here and just get the whole panel covered. Really, really get those corners and edges really good. Nice and even. And then when you're done, don't forget to wash your, or else they're going to not be any good anymore. So just sit this over here. Okay, so now I'm going to just take my painting and I'm going to line it up here. You could just center it if you want. I'm not good at that, so I'm just going to kind of make sure all my I don't see the canvas panel, but it's pretty lined up. And just kind of get it on there as best you can. And I'm just going to press down. And what I like to use is a flat edge, because I like to then just kind of go lightly over my painting. Make sure there's no air bubbles in there. just like that. Just press it down nice and firm. And then what I like to do is then I like to put a piece of wax paper or parchment paper or even a piece of like regular paper, printer paper or something. And just lay it down just to protect the painting. And then I lay a book on top, something heavy. And then I just leave it here for about an hour and let it really, really adhere to that panel. And once that's dry, then I will come back and I'll show you how to seal the top. Okay, so I will see you in about an hour. Okay guys, so through the magic of video, my painting is dried. It has really, it's been about an hour now, and it has really adhered to the canvas panel. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to trim up the excess paper that I have on here. So you want to, make sure you use something to protect your paper. You can use scissors here. I'm just going to use a box cutter. I just find it's easiest for me. So, whatever way works for you. And how I like to do it is I like to have the part I'm cutting facing towards me, just so I can get a good grip on it. And I'm going to lay my hand down and, hold it. And then I just kind of right along the edge of my side of my panel here, I'm just going to press down and just cut that excess paper off. There we go. Now, sometimes there might be a little extra, so I'll just try and get in there. Sometimes I have cut the panel itself a little bit. That's not a big deal, though. There we go. I just like to get all the excess. Now, I'll do the other one, but sometimes I don't get it quite even. Totally fine. Before I resin, I can sometimes take a nail file or a little piece of sandpaper and just smooth out if there's any rough edges. Works really well. All right, so I'm going to just do this side. That's why I like to line mine up as best as I can before I seal it to the canvas panel. So that way I only have to do a couple sides. I don't have to do all 4 sides. Okay. So now it is nice and clean on my panel, and I can go ahead and seal something there. Go ahead and seal the top. Same thing, my little sponge applicator. You can use whatever you feel comfortable with. And I'm just going to keep my brush strokes going down. I don't want to do it all different brush strokes. I want to just keep them going in the same direction as much as I can. And I'm going to be pressing very lightly here. I don't want to disturb any of my paint. You want to make sure that you are totally covering your paper, because if resin gets on any of the paper that has not been covered, you'll notice it once that resin's dry. It'll dry kind of gray. So you don't want that. So make sure you get all your paper covered as best you can. Just be very gentle. Don't press down too hard. Get your edges real good. And this will dry clear. So if you want to add anything or make changes on your painting before you do this, do it before you do this set. the step, because once it's sealed, that's it. Just any excess, get over there. So just kind of any little chunky bits, try to get those off of there. And just get it as nice and even as you can. And getting all parts of the paper covered really, really well. I'll see some of my paint is starting to bleed a little bit there, but that's okay. It just adds to the painting. Let me go up. Let me take it in the up direction. It's all right. It's a little flour. It doesn't matter. Just be real gentle. You know, if you want, you can let your painting dry overnight to really give it some time. And okay, so now this part has to dry completely, which I'll give it till tomorrow to dry completely, and then we can go ahead and embellish and in resin and put resin on them. So that's it, guys. If you have any questions about this part, please feel free to let me know, and I will be happy to answer anything I can. And I will see you in the next video.